I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside. It's so comfortable and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off road. The guy managed the group. He was like, "What are you doing in this beautiful car?" I'm like, "I'm going off road." He's like, "Are you sure? Because you can use one of ours." And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, no, we're going to do this. And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability as well as its robust interior are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
Sometimes it takes a different approach to help you unlock your true potential. Capella University's game-changing FlexPath format helps you learn at your own pace and fit earning a degree into your life. From before you enroll to after you graduate, you'll be supported by people who are invested in your success so you can pursue your goals knowing that help is available if you need it. Imagine your future differently at capella.edu.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show on the Stansberry Radio Network.
I'm so excited today. Chris Hadfield, astronaut extraordinaire, is on the show, but not only an astronaut, he's also a social media. Chris, I don't know if I would call you a genius, but you're one of the most, you're probably the most followed astronaut on the internet, would you say?
Yeah, maybe Buzz Aldrin is. He walked on the moon. I don't know, but yeah, it's amazing. It's millions of people that follow along. And it's a real delight to me. You know, I'm pleased people are interested in exploring the rest of the universe and the stuff that I've done so far in life.
And you know, I want to dive into your career as an astronaut, but I also want to ask, when you came, so your biggest, most popular thing on YouTube was when you were playing the guitar and singing Space Oddity, and was that what kind of like that got 25 million views? And you're seeing it from the space station, ISS. Is that, do you think, what catapulted you to social media success?
Well, I don't know. It's a pretty slow catapult, James. I've been an astronaut for 21 years. And yeah, actually, before I recorded Space Oddity, we had about 800,000 people following on Twitter. So it definitely a lot of people saw that cover of Space Oddity that I did. You know, as you say, it's just 25 million people just where my son posted it onto YouTube with all the rebroadcasts. Everywhere I go in the world, it's hundreds of millions of people have seen it. But I kind of ask myself why. Why the space station didn't change and I didn't change. Why does covering a Bowie tune suddenly really get people's interest? And it's something to do with the crossover between fantasy and reality, or the crossover between science and exploration and art, I guess. But it sure did get a lot of people's attention.
I think also, you know, we often think of these astronauts as doing these incredibly complicated, almost magical things in outer space. You know, people always say the magic of today is the science of tomorrow. But here you were doing, and you did this with a lot of your YouTube videos and Tumblr and tweets and everything else. Here you were doing, you were in this space station and you were doing something we here on Earth like. So it becomes instantly relatable. And just like you were showing, I don't know, how you were brushing your teeth on the space station, like that also becomes something that becomes instantly a viral video. Hey, I could brush my teeth in outer space.
Well, I was in I'm a Canadian, but I was in the NASA astronaut office for a long time, for over 2 decades. And so I spoke, I don't know, probably in 1,000 schools over those 21 years and all over businesses in the United Nations and everywhere. And I really started to get a feel for what people want to know. What are people actually curious about? What are the things that everybody comes up to me and asks the question of? And so I'd resolve. I mean, you'd probably do the same thing if you were going to space for half a year. I resolved to myself that I really want to take advantage of being up there to explain those things to the best of my ability, to show people, how do you go to the bathroom up there? Or what if you sneeze, do you do a back somersault? Or all the other little stuff that people always ask. And it was really delightful, now that there's sort of primitive internet on the space station, to be able to share it real time and see the enormous way. I mean, some of those videos I made just on what it's like to wring out a cloth of water, it's like, I don't know, 13 million people have been intrigued by it. And a lot of them students, and it makes them think maybe just a little bit different. So I think the power of sharing human experience, like we can do with social media, we're just starting to figure out how important that is in spreading information around the world and helping people maybe think and do things a little differently.
Right, because if you figure, let's say the ultimate or one of the ultimate goals of space travel is to see if humans themselves can live, in either a space station or a moon station or whatever. What you're showing is this is what it's going to be like day to day. You know, these are things that nobody's ever seen before.
Yeah, I think there's sort of, I mean, there are a lot of laboratories across the U.S., and I really don't know what's going on in most of them. I sort of have this vague, inaccurate, television-driven view of what's going on in, I don't know, Lawrence Livermore Labs or Sandia Lab or Los Alamos or somewhere, but I don't really know. But it's really probably just a bunch of people, you know, having sort of an interesting time and having coffee breaks and discovering things and doing mundane things. And on the space station, it's the same. A lot of people sort of think it's some weird esoteric robot existence doing experiments that nobody understands. But of course, it's not like that at all. It's just people up there in a really unusual place, seeing the world in a way that nobody else sees it, and trying to run the 200 experiments on board to the best of our ability. But innately, it's the same as brushing your teeth. The people are interested everywhere in what other people are doing. You know, what are people doing under those circumstances? What's it like to be there? And that's what I really tried to help people see. And it's just been amazing to now just walking down the street anywhere on Earth and people come up and say hi.
You're probably one of the most recognizable astronauts out there, actually.
I think I am. Yeah, just anecdotally looking at it.
You know, so I want to mention you have an excellent autobiography. It's called An Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth. What going to space taught me about ingenuity, determination, and they cut it off on Amazon.
And being ready for anything, I think, is what it is.
Yes, and so I wanted to ask you really about your whole career and kind of certain aspects of that book and things you mentioned, because I think a lot of the advice you apply or a lot of the advice you give about being an astronaut applies to starting a business or applies to competence in any endeavor someone would want to try. And I also sense an element of the philosophy of Stoicism in the book and how you conquered the different problems that you faced while on your path to being an astronaut. You know,
I'm happy to talk about it. I mean, looking at your background, James, you've had some ups and downs in Stoicism as well. I think I'd be happy to talk about that also. But the book, I'm glad you had a chance to look at it. I've read
the whole thing. It's a great book. I highly recommend it.
It's in 20 languages already, and it's a bestseller all around the world. So it's really weird to see something that I created when someone mails me a copy of it in Chinese or Korean or some language I can't even read one character of. It shows both the size, the huge variety, but also the tiny, close, interconnected nature of the world. It's somehow delightful to see the book spreading around the world as an idea.
Well, thinking about it that way, it sort of all of a sudden brought to mind a different question for me, which is, if you look at the human species, we've always been trying to explore the next space. The next, for instance, how did people with no heating cross negative 60-degree Siberia to Alaska, and then just 4,000 years later populate from Alaska down to South America? I sort of see space exploration as almost like the next, step in our evolution as a species. And so we're all kind of fascinated by someone who can articulate what it's like to be on that frontier.
Yeah, James, what's intriguing is when you're floating at the window of the space station and you go around the world every 92 minutes. So you see the world in its completeness 16 times a day. But you think about exactly what you're saying there. You picture as you come across the big Rift Valley of Africa, and you picture those very first people. We're thinking maybe 1 million years ago that started walking out of there, and that became Java Man, and then 80,000 years ago that settled in Australia and became what is now the Aboriginal people there, or 50,000 years ago and started heading up into Europe, and then 20,000 or so years ago crossed into North America and started settling all the way down to the southern tip. And because you see the world so fast, you can't help but picture what the exploration was like for them compared to the exploration trip that we're on as astronauts. The link between the two is just pouring in through your eyes. And so it's really palpable. And we talk about it and how it is that human beings explore, and how the technology really becomes the limit of it. How did we invent boats yet? How do we navigate? How do we live in a place that has a less friendly environment than Central Africa? And what have we done to allow civilization to flourish? It all pours underneath you as a constant kaleidoscope, and you really start to see the entire history just right there below your feet.
Yeah, because if you think about it, the need to get into space, the desire to get into space almost came before the problems that we now solve by having space stations and satellites and so on. And you indirectly described this in your book. You said your first inclination, your desire to go to be an astronaut started when you saw Neil Armstrong land on the moon. So you were 9 years old. You didn't think, oh, okay, I'm going to do this very sophisticated experiment 30 or 40 years later. You thought to yourself, I want to do that.
Yeah. When you talk about exploration and those steps, it's intriguing to me that if you watch how an infant develops, it's curious that we learn how to walk way before we understand basically anything. We get the ability to explore way before we get common sense or we get any sort of perspective on how thing works. We've I don't know, the whole evolution process has shown us that we kind of need to go have a look and go try stuff and stick it in your mouth and rub it between your fingers and sit on it. And then you start to understand it. And then you start to encompass it into your comprehension of common sense. And that pattern of what a 1-year-old does is really repeated in everything we do. As you get older, you take trips, you try things out. We send people to the furthest reaches of the world, and now starting to leave the world, and it inspires people. The whole idea of these possibilities, that's what opens up the mind. And for me, as you say, I was 9 years old when Neil and Buzz walked on the moon, and it wasn't that I was interested in doing core of the moon, ancient origins type research, or trying to understand planetary dynamics, I was just inspired by the whole adventure of exploration itself. It is so innate and fundamental to us. And even though I was growing up in a country that had no astronaut program, Canada, in the 60s and 70s, the fact that people were doing this, that the impossible was sort of happening right in front of my eyes, it was like a door swinging open, the same as a little kid who first takes those steps and realizes they can cross the room. It was just a door swinging open for me to maybe, if I could balance, maybe I could have a chance to go through it someday. And it did not disappoint. It was just an amazing sequence of events that allowed me to fly in space 3 times.
So that's interesting, the notion of impossibility. So you see this thing on TV that's essentially impossible, a man walking on the moon. For a gazillion years, every species on Earth probably thought that was impossible. And you saw it happening on TV. Do you think that changed your notion of what was impossible, so that allowed you to say, hey, I'm Canadian, but it doesn't mean I can't at some point go over to the U.S. and fly a rocket to space?
Yeah, it was hugely like permission giving to see that impossible things happen. That morning, on the morning of July 20th, 1969, it was impossible to walk on the moon. No one had ever done it by definition. And by bedtime, after watching it on TV and then walking outside and looking up at the moon, it was sort of like in a Rubik's Cube when you're spinning it and suddenly you get they line up and you go, wow, look at that. Things lined up. They sort of clicked into place in my head. I realized impossible things actually happen. And maybe the key to it, though, was they don't happen randomly. They happen because of how you're turning the cube in front of you. They happen sometimes because they just barely can, because someone's making them happen through their own individual effort. So it was like someone giving me permission to do something. If someone said, hey, you want to be Superman? You go, well, that's just comic book. But then if suddenly the guy next to you said up and away and flew off, and you realized it was possible, that would really change your motivation of how you maybe wanted to do things in your own life. And that's what it was like for me. It was permission to start maybe trying to do something that otherwise would be completely outrageous.
I like how you went from permission to possible to impossible. And it started, like, I was amazed when you wrote at the age of 15, you got your glider's license, and at age 16, you were starting to fly powered planes. Now, I have a 16-year-old daughter. I would never let her fly a powered plane in the air, like higher than 3 feet high. So what were your parents thinking? Like when you said to them, oh, I'm going to go fly 10,000 feet up in the air now, and I'm 16 years old. Did your parents say, oh, yeah, just be home for dinner?
My parents always really honored work and curiosity answered. Their philosophy, they bought us an Encyclopedia Britannica, which in the 60s and 70s, that was the internet, and we would never have a conversation and leave it unresolved if you could go actually look up the answer. And the beauty of looking up the answer and understanding it was then that led to other questions, but it also led to just a slowly increased comprehension and appreciation for the world around us. And it was a farm with 5 kids, so there was always lots of discussion and argument about things. And so when it came to flying, it was like, well, how are you going about it, and what program, and who are you studying with, and how are you pursuing it, and it was formalized through a Air Cadet program, and so they recognized right off that the benefits had the potential to way outpower or overpower the risks, and yeah.
But the risk is their kid dying in a plane.
Yeah, but the other risk, James, is that you will not reach the potential that you're capable of, which to me is the ultimate risk, the ultimate loss. If we sort of just let ourselves be minimized by fear, you could spend your entire life hiding in bed and having the pizza guy bring food to your house, and you're still going to die. And the real question is, what did you accomplish? What did you do? What things happened in your life that gave you joy and satisfaction and maybe helped somebody else? And I was just instilled from a kid that to make the most of yourself, to recognize that you don't take risks for no reason, but some risks are worth taking because they lead to opportunity. They lead to doing things. They lead to commanding a spaceship. And so I think I have a lot to thank parents for in just giving me a certain attitude and set of values that honored accomplishment and honored measured risk taking in order to do something that leads to something worthwhile in life.
Another person you have to give credit to, and I mean, it sounds like your parents were incredible, but you met your wife at the age of 18. Helene is her name?
Yeah, it's her dad's German, so it's pronounced Helena.
Helena. So you met her so young, and it seems like every step of the way she's been with you saying, okay, you've got to take this next step. Like, she has been just as much kind of a partner as a supporter in getting you to that astronaut level. And, it seems to me two challenges. One is marrying so young and sticking together through, such a huge path that you've gone through. And then the other thing is kind of withstanding the times apart. Like, you've spent 166 days in space. Yeah. Like, I wonder if you could comment on her role in your amazing achievement.
Well, sure. Well, yeah. Actually, I met Helena when she was 14, just a couple of days before she turned 15. We were.
Wait, how old were you then? We just got to make sure.
I just turned 16. So
okay,
we were in a high school play together, and so I think our first date, she was 15 and I was 16, and we waited 6 years to get married. But even still, she was just 20 when we got married, and it, of course, she remarks to me all the time, there's no way our marriage should have worked out. The odds were hugely stacked against us. But we have both always really respected what the other person is doing, I think, is one of the key important parts. I would never describe, if someone came up to me and said, so who are you? I would never answer the question, I'm a chef's husband. And if you came up to Helena and said, who are you? She would never answer, I'm an astronaut's wife. It's not who she is. It's not how she values herself. She supports me. She thinks she's sort of somewhat interested in what I'm doing and make sure that there's opportunities for me to get better at it and pursue it. But I try and do the same with her. And if she wants to go back to school and study law, she did that for a year. Try and make sure that we're giving each other as much freedom and opportunity as possible to pursue the things that are independently important to us, but also be ready to support each other when things go badly. And after the Challenger accident in 1986, when the space shuttle so publicly blew up and killed all the people on board, I just thought, there's no future to this program. Why? We were living in northern Quebec with 2.5 little kids and the third one on the way. And I was like, what am I doing? There's no way I'm ever going to fly in space. And the program is probably going to ground to a halt here. And so I pretty much talked myself out of pursuing a career as an astronaut. I just decided, okay, it was impossible. But that's a really good time in life to be going through life with someone strong and someone who doesn't just say yes to you all the time or say no to you all the time, but actually someone who's interested in what you're doing and has a different perspective. And Helena, her point at the time was, well, we're not rich, but we're making enough. We have shoes on our feet, we have meals every meal, and we're doing okay. You're just a lieutenant in the Air Force, but we're doing okay. And we don't need to change anything right away. And NASA, they may choose to start flying again despite this accident. And on the other side, if you give up on your dreams right now, then that will have the biggest repercussion of all. It will always be a burr under your saddle. You gave up on your dreams because of whatever, family pressure, the need to be a good provider, the need to have some stability. And that you don't get for free. Giving up on your dreams doesn't come for free. And so we made the measured decision together to stick it out, see what happened. And then amazingly enough, I got selected to go to test pilot school at Edwards, and then got a tour with the Navy at Patuxent River in Maryland, working as a test pilot on exchange with the Navy. And then the program got on its feet, and I got selected as an astronaut in '92. So if possible, find someone else, I think, in life to go through it, who's got strength, who has perspective, who can tell you when you're being an idiot, but who can also tell you when you're being smart. And I think it's nice to have someone to point out the beauties of life with as things go by.
My wife definitely tells me when I'm an idiot, but 1 out of 10 of those, she tells me I'm smart, so then I feel good again. But I remember, though, when Helena was telling you what she was telling you, you were considering a spot on taking a job with Air Canada, and that's when she told you, stick to the astronaut thing, even though it seemed like it wasn't there.
I really love flying. I still do, but I love the challenge of flying and the complexity of it and why things fly. And I'm an engineer as well as a pilot, and so for me, heading in the direction of being a test pilot, that was a means to the end. That was a qualification that might allow me to get selected as an astronaut, but it was also a fascinating challenge for myself, and also I think a really worthwhile thing. I helped develop how to make airplanes fly safer and different types of engines and handling qualities of airplanes and things. And so it was, for me, a really nice melding of the stuff that was important to me. And so if I'd gone to Air Canada, which my dad was an airline pilot and both my brothers chose to be airline pilots, I understand the life. It's stable. It has a good income. It has a level of responsibility, and it is flying. But both of us, my wife and I, recognized that was not choice A for me, or even choice B, or even choice C. It was one of the things I could do in life, but until we were at a threshold where I had to change my direction and give up on a certain set of dreams, then there was no reason to. And it was really good that we listened to each other, and in this case, I listened to Elena, I think.
Okay, so it seems like there was a lot of problems in the way, though, along the way. It's very difficult to become an astronaut, and you mentioned at one point you had a slot with France to basically, I guess, represent them in the astronaut program, but then they gave away your slot, and it was very depressing to you. How did you kind of come back from that? Like, how do you get over moments like that where once again you think it might take years for you to recapture something that was so close?
I think, the event was, we'd been guaranteed a slot to go to test pilot school with the French Air Force, and it's down in the Mediterranean. We were living in northern Quebec at the time, in a place that is pretty challenging weather and very different than the city of Toronto, where my wife grew up, and we had 3 small kids at home. And boy, the whole idea of moving to the Mediterranean and living with a house overlooking the blue seas, and the winter was mild, it all sounded so lovely and tempting. And then due to some sort of political spat, that slot got taken away, and suddenly we were facing another winter in northern Quebec. It was not pleasant. It was not what we wanted to hear. It was not the sequence that we wanted. But we also were mature enough to recognize it wasn't the end either. This was just a misstep. This was just a boulder in the way that either we could let defeat us, or we could just go, something to go around, and who knows what will happen as a result.
What I'm curious is how, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but I got curious. What I'm curious is, how long did it take you to realize that even though this was not the sequence you wanted, that it was a boulder that you couldn't get around? Like, because was it like a day, or was it a month or a year?
Well, everything's a gamble in life. Everything worthwhile is a risk. Everything. You always have to bet on things coming out the way you want. And in this case, that hand of cards we lost. We thought we were going to win. We thought we had a terrific hand, but it didn't come on that deal. But there's almost always another deal coming, and there's going to be a new set of cards. And so we looked at it. There, one very painful evening of disappointment, just like a kid at Christmas who doesn't get the thing they dreamed of, and then some lingering anger and resigning ourselves to the fact that particular sequence wasn't going to happen. But then you just start looking forward. And if you've given yourself kind of a long-term goal of things that are going to happen, we want this particular sequence of possibilities to happen in our life, then you recognize that it's the day-to-day stuff is variable, but you continue to make decisions that pull you towards that long-term goal of maybe someday walking on the moon or flying a spaceship. And this wasn't the only way to get there. And as it turned out, just a little while later, I got accepted to the test pilot school, not the one in France, but the one in California, which that was the only way I ever would have been a test pilot with the Navy at Patuxent River in Maryland. And that combination of having flown a tour with the Air Force and with the Navy was absolutely pivotal in me being selected as an astronaut. And so looking back, you kind of go, well, it wasn't the way we wanted at the time, but when you look at it in the big picture, it's probably the best thing that could have happened. And you just have to, lick your lips and go, well, that didn't work out the way I wanted, but I'm not done here. And that wasn't the only thing. And the two of us commiserated and dealt with it. And I think within a few weeks, we had settled back into our normal pattern and just looked forward to what was going to come next.
Well, that's interesting because I don't know if everybody always believes that there's another hand coming to you. Some people, hit an obstacle and then that's it. They give up. And I don't know if I'm not making a judgment on that because maybe they're right in some cases. Like if you're 35 years old and you're not drafted by the NBA, you're probably not going to get to be a professional basketball player. But how did you know that there's going to be another hand coming? Because the hand that came obviously was totally unpredictable, being a test pilot in California.
Right, but at no point, I think maybe the key thing, James, is at no point did I say to myself, if I don't walk on the moon, I'm a failure. What I said instead was, I would really love to walk on the moon. That is my long-term personal NBA for me. That is me, the starting center of the rockets, is if I get to walk on the moon. But it's probably never going to happen. But what it's going to do for me is, if I just carry the metaphor to a painful level, this weekend, I'm going to dribble the ball 1,000 times, or I'm going to shoot 1,000 baskets, or I'm going to practice the layup until I can't stand it anymore, or I am going to work on my skills in this particular subset so that by Sunday night, I will be a slightly better astronaut or a slightly better ball player or someone who has pulled his life in the direction I'm dreaming of. And that's when I'm going to celebrate it. I'm not going to wait until the NBA draft when they go, no, once again, we're not picking you. Instead, I'm going to say, you know what? Friday, I couldn't sink a layup to save my life. And now 1 out of 3 I sink, or whatever, 1 out of 2 I sink. And I think it's the celebration of incremental success that makes the big difference in what you're asking. If you're waiting to win the lottery in order to feel like anything's worthwhile in your life, then you're setting yourself up for misery. But instead, if you allow yourself to celebrate each tiny little success, I think it's way more palatable and it's a lot more fun. You just have to change your threshold of what success is.
Oh yeah, and I totally agree with you. You have you actually have a beautiful passage in your book where you say, if I can quote you, if you start thinking that only your biggest and shiniest moments count, you're setting yourself up for failure most of the time. So to me, everything counts: the small ones, the medium ones, the successes. But I'm gonna ask you about that in a different context. So reeling ahead, past a couple of space station, past a couple of trips into outer space, but before your big trip, you're in 2011, you're going for the ultrasound to determine if you basically meet the medical threshold for an extensive space trip, outer space trip. And you were worried. You and your wife were worried about whether you were going to kind of pass this ultrasound. And if you didn't, was this, how would you continue? You were worried you were going to lose your sense of purpose. So do you think then you would have been able to recapture that sense of purpose if you had failed that ultrasound?
James, that was a real watershed in life for my wife and I, in that I'd had a medical thing. It's written up in the book, but it was kind of an old thing from having my appendix out when I was 12 years old, and it led to I needed some arthroscopic surgery to go in and release a little web of stuff. But we'd had the surgery done. Everybody was happy, and then the conservative nature of medicine and the huge expense they were risking on putting me up on the space station, the doctors weren't convinced that the problem was solved, and it all came down to one day, and as you say, this one ultrasound test. And the ultrasound is in downtown Houston. So my wife and I had to drive from the Johnson Space Center down to the medical center downtown. So there's about a 30 or 40 minute drive. And we realize that when we drive back, this is going to be decided. Our life is going one way, which is for me to go command a spaceship, or our life is going the other way, which is I'm never going to fly in space again, and basically we're going to go home. And so what would you discuss on that drive? And what I thought was the most worthwhile thing to say was, let's visualize that it goes badly. Because if it goes well, it's easy. So let's just make the assumption right now that the result is negative, that I don't pass the ultrasound, that there's some sort of suspicious internal thing. What are we going to do? Who are we going to phone? Who's the first person we're going to phone? And what are we going to do next? And what is it that is going to be fun? Maybe a real good time to go back to university, because as a test pilot, flown astronaut, I can probably go teach. I can probably work as a test pilot, university instructor. And plus, I said out loud, I've already flown in space twice. I've been a test pilot. We are not going to become defined as that poor guy who failed his medical and didn't fly in space for the third time. Instead, we should be triumphant. We've already done something that is almost impossible, flown in space twice. And if we don't fly a third time, that's kind of our decision, whether that's a failure or not. That's really just an event of life. And so we actually took concrete steps and said, if we fail this, I'm going to phone these 3 people to tell them the news, and then we're going to go home, and then we're going to start thinking about moving back to Canada and start looking at universities and just basically set up a plan. This is what we're going to do if it goes badly. And it probably will go badly because, medical things you can never count on. So when the doctor put the ultrasound sensor on my belly and was looking, and suddenly almost miraculously saw what we hoped he would see, which was that everything was looking and moving normally. It was almost more of a surprise than anything. It was obviously a huge sense of relief and a sense of luck and delight. But we had actually gotten ourselves mentally ready for the most probable bad thing to happen and start to come to grips with it, and not just sit there with our fingers crossed and then be overwhelmed with the disappointment. And, it was kind of a big moment in our lives, but in an exaggerated fashion, it's kind of how we treat everything. The same way is have a look at what's liable to go wrong, think about what we're going to do when those things go wrong, get prepared for them. And then if things go well, life becomes a pleasant surprise rather than a sequence of disappointments.
Well, and I also think you did one other thing, which is you also celebrated the successes. So you said, look, we already did what we set out to do initially, which is you became an astronaut, you went into space, and then you kind of you didn't just say, okay, if the ultrasound works, I'm going to go into space. If it doesn't work, I'm going to do this. You kind of diversified your outcomes. You said there are many possible positive outcomes out of this, as opposed to just one.
Sure, absolutely. And it's easy. The easiest thing in the world is to be cynical and negative. Of course, it's the simplest answer to almost any situation. But I think being deliberately and resourcefully positive is a better way to go through life. And in that case,
but it's funny you say that. You say because at the same time you say with the ultrasound you said let's plan on the worst happening. So reconcile that with going through life being positive.
Well, no, not planning on the worst happening. Visualizing failure, visualizing things. I mean, things always break. Things always go wrong. But how you react to them is kind of up to you. And so when you say it's the worst, that's a judgmental measure applied to just a thing that happened. And the worst would be that one of us died or something, because then you're out of options. But we still have loads of options, and there's lots of good things that happen in our lives already. And so it's really just a matter of putting yourself in perspective and then looking at what might happen, and then how can we make that as good for ourselves as possible? How can we do the things that still give us a sense of satisfaction and pride and joy, given whatever the set of circumstances are? Don't go all negative on what might have been or whatever. Instead, anticipate things not going perfectly, but don't gripe about things that didn't happen the way they were supposed to. And I mean, I'm not perfect at all, and I have pangs of regret and frustration sometimes at how it goes. But I've been really lucky in life, and I've been around the world 2,600 times. My wife and I have raised 3 kids. I've played music with bands that I should never have played with. I've been extremely lucky at the events of life as well. And I think being able to kid yourself and recognize just how fortunate the actual life has been, that it helps you get over the transient disappointments and keep everything in its correct balance.
Well, you say even in the book, a funny thing happened on the way to space, and you kind of add to that. You learned how to live better on Earth, and part of that was by always in every situation anticipating in advance what problems could arise. And you then kind of veer from that into also leadership. Like you describe, there's 3 types of people on a team: a negative one, a 0, and a positive one. And you say sometimes it's very positive to be a 0 because that makes you extremely observant about what problems could ever arise if you were a +1.
Yeah. Well, I it was something I thought of a little later in life, because when I was a 25-year-old fighter pilot, I was completely sure I was a +1 at everything I did, no matter what. But you need a level of confidence to be trust. I mean, I was intercepting Soviet bombers in North American airspace with a fully armed F-18 when I was in my mid-20s. And so you have to know what you're doing and have confidence about it. But it occurred to me a few years later, watching the behavior of others, that when you come into a situation, even though you are confident in your abilities, there are always subtleties in a new environment that you miss at first. There are nuances to what's happening around you that you're blind to, at first. You walk into an elevator and there are 5 people in the elevator with you. You don't immediately know everything about the 5 people around you. You get a quick impression, but you have some mistakes in first impressions. And I realized that rather than coming in and starting to dictate actions immediately, where everybody around you who is a little more attuned to the environment is going, wow, who is this idiot? They don't even know what they're doing, and they're changing stuff, like moving pieces on a chessboard before you've even seen where all the pieces are. You are far better served if you... So in that case, you're not a +1. You're, in fact, a -1 when you're trying to be a plus. You are far better served to just remind yourself, give myself some brief period of time, sort of targeting just to be a 0 here. I'm just going to not be a -1. I'm going to be supportive. I'm going to observe what's going on around. I'm going to use the skills I have to perpetuate what's happening. And then I'm going to be a lot more surgical in doing things that make me a +1. Give myself the luxury of time to do things right. You can't do that if the building's on fire. You know, if the building's on fire, you need to act with the best you got right now. But the building is hardly ever on fire. Sometimes we just act that way. And so for me, and I tried to make it in the book as simply memorable as I could by using -1, 0, +1 ideas. And what's intriguing, James, is the majority of people that have read the book and come up to me, they mention that chapter of +1, 0, and -1 as being maybe the most useful and the most memorable, partially because I tried to take a complex idea and make it, easy to remind yourself of through a simple comparator. But a lot of people, I think, just have never quite recognized how beneficial it can be to have a better understanding of yourself, a little more clearer reflection and perspective of yourself in a new situation, and target it first. Deliberately say, I'm just going to be a 0 here for a little while, and then maybe I can start being a deliberate +1 and help this group along, and not just come in and be a bull knocking down china all around myself and not even knowing I'm doing it.
Well, it's a unique perception in our society, because we're always aiming, like, I'm going to be the best. I'm going to be the best. And you were even aiming to be the best. But sometimes the way to be, like, life is a cycle, like a sine wave, and you always have to be able to survive those valleys. And so sometimes the best way is to focus on being a 0 first.
Yeah, for me, I do it deliberately well. And part of it, it's not necessarily in business. As an astronaut and in a lot of other professions, you're away from home a lot. And I watched my father, who was an airline pilot, he'd go on a 10-day cycle and come back to the household after 10 days and immediately start changing things and dictating things and telling people what to do and kind of just disrupt the whole place. And not recognizing that we had found a way as 5 kids with our mom to function, obviously. And it was working. The house hadn't fallen down and everyone was getting their homework done, but he didn't have the perspective of seeing his inadvertent effect on the family by coming back in and asserting himself as what he was sure was a big +1, but everybody else knew this was a big -1. And so when I came back from extended travel like an astronaut does, I would deliberately, on the way home, remind myself that the family's doing fine without me, that they've got a good way of working, and that I need to be an observer for a while before I start trying to change things and make things, my particular version of better. And I sure didn't do it perfectly, but I think it's still a useful reminder, and sometimes I get it right.
I don't know if you've ever seen a James Bond movie and then afterwards you're feeling like all adventurous and you want to be a spy and that whole thing. I feed off of the things that I watch and read, and I'm sure you do, or many people do. But after I read your book, I was feeling this enormous feeling of competence. To be an astronaut, it strikes me, the most important skill is not necessarily whether you can fly a plane or hold your breath or whatever, but to be really competent at many, many tasks, both important tasks and what tasks that might not seem so important. And that sort of seems like the theme of the right stuff as well. I wonder if you can talk about that. What's your sense of what it means to be competent, what it means to really be an astronaut? Because, and again, not to overspeak here, but you even say when you first went up into space, that very first second, you weren't yet an astronaut. You had to be in space for 20 days before you felt like you were finally a quote-unquote astronaut.
Yeah, people don't really know what astronauts do, of course. I don't really know what surgeons do. I don't really know what radio hosts do. I have a sort of a distorted view of it, but I don't know for sure. But what astronauts really do is spend most of their adult life getting ready for a vehicle, an extremely complicated vehicle to behave in a way that they didn't expect, and to be the only person on Earth that can solve the problem. That's what we really do, is visualize extremely esoteric and complex failures where no one can solve the problem but us. And so, because Earth, when you're in space, Earth is just a help desk. That's the best they can do, really.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, and so how do you get ready for that? And what it all boils down to is an insatiable, permanent necessity for personal competence, to always become better. Because even if you completely master some part of it, some subtle thing is going to change. They're going to upgrade the software or change the display, or there'll be a subtle failure of one little diode and suddenly it'll behave completely differently. All you can do is continually try and improve your understanding of how things work. And so that is, and it manifests itself different than you might think. In order to get ready for my third space flight, I worked at San Jacinto College and studied how to be an emergency medical technician, and went through all of the simulations of the human body and how to do all of the fundamental skills and get qualified in first aid. And then I went to the hospital in downtown Houston, and I worked in the burn ward, and I worked in the eyeball ward. I went down into the cadaver lab, and I did all basic skills that you might need working on a cadaver. And then I was in the operating room with Red Duke, the guy that declared Kennedy dead. And then I worked in emergency. And as people came in just off the street, I was sewing them up and stapling them up and intubating them and catheterizing them and all the other things. All of those skills, all of those competencies, just in case somebody else in my crew got sick. And that level of necessity to gain skills is what astronauts do. It is the only way that we can be actually trusted to go leave the planet and fly in space. And it's fun. It's challenging. It's interesting. I can freeze your mouth and take your molars out if you need, or I can take your appendix out. I wouldn't recommend me to do it, but if need be, I can do that. And that level of skill, once you have it, it just gives you sort of an improved comfort. If I'm driving down the highway and I see a bad car crash, I know that I can walk up to the car crash with a more elevated set of competence skills than most people as a result of the work of things I've done to my life to this point. And to me, it just makes me feel more comfortable. I'm not nervous about what's going to happen next because I put a lot of my life into trying to get better at stuff. And I do it as just a habit pattern now. I think if you're not studying something at all times to improve your ability to do things, then I kind of ask, why not? What's the other thing that you're doing that is more important than getting better at life?
Well, and also it seems like when you're at ISS, and like you say, Earth is all it is a help desk, you're also trusting that your co-astronauts that are on the space station, they've also done the same training, just in case something happens to you.
Yeah, and as the commander of the spaceship, we, of course, I work with the training team. I mean, for my second space flight, 4.5 years before launch, I went with the training team to the company that builds the full-scale models of that part of the spaceship. And we told them how to build the models so that the models would, the sort of the three-dimensional simulations of the parts of the spaceship, so that they would act well enough that we could then use them in training and simulation in order to teach ourselves all of the things that might go wrong, so that when the real thing happened 4 or 5 years from then, we would have all of the competencies and skills necessary. That level of interactive preparation is the only way we do the business. And people sort of take it for granted and don't understand it, but that's what astronauts and NASA, that's what we really do for a living. And you have to have those skills on board yourself, and they're hard earned. But once you have them, then the whole thing, not only are you more confident, but I think, James, you appreciate it better because you're not all worried about the overwhelming fear of what might happen, but you're kind of calm and appreciative, and it gives you mental maneuvering room to kind of look around and notice how marvelous this is, what's actually happening. You can disembody yourself and love what's happening because you're not panicked and overwhelmed and unsure of what you're going to be doing.
Yeah, you say in the book, I've learned that investing in other people's success doesn't make them more likely to enjoy working with me. It also improves my own chances of survival and success. So, and it seems like that's critical to being an astronaut. Even though you're highly competitive while you're each going for those few slots, who's going to make it to the space station this year, it also means, if you're the one who shows that you care about other people's success, that's going to be noticed.
Well, let's say you and I this weekend decided we're going to climb Mount Whitney. It's not particularly high, but it's high. It's not easy to climb. And I just said to you, we're going to climb Mount Whitney. I'll meet you, Owens Valley Friday at 4:00. Instead, if I said, hey, this weekend, let's climb Mount Whitney. So let's get together this evening and start talking about what skills each of us doesn't have yet. And what don't we know? And do you know how to rappel? And what first aid and what gear should we bring? And let's invest some time in each other's competence. Let's invest some time in learning what you are good at and what I'm good at and what we can teach each other. And then let's maybe practice. Let's go into the backyard and climb the apartment building wall 3 times. And let's practice one of us breaking a leg and see how we deal with it. And then let's go get drunk together and have a good time anticipating the fun thing that's going on. And do that for the whole week. By the time you and I set out to climb Mount Whitney, we would be 2 slightly different people. Not only would we be readier for it, but we would have a much better understanding of each other. And when we get to the top of Mount Whitney, we'd have a lot more to celebrate together as 2 people. And that's what I wanted to do with my crew in the whole space flight. We spent years together training in advance and doing all of those things so that when the actual event happened, you have a lot more room to love it and to relish the joy that the other people are getting out of it, rather than just enduring something together.
It's funny how things are measured in years, not just in your field, but among the fields of so many people I talk to. Like, you talk about how in 1986 you were disappointed, but here now we're also talking about 2013, you were in the ISS. It's so many, and how you train starting 4 years in advance, with your team. Like, people want overnight success so often, and yet real success is measured in years.
It's funny too, when you look back at Space Oddity, I've had people come up to me and go, hey, you have kind of a nice voice. Did you learn to play guitar on the space station? It just makes me laugh. I bought my first guitar when I was 9 or 10 years old, and I played guitar for 40 years, and I fronted bands for 20 years, and I taught myself bass, and I had a music teacher that taught me to play trombone and bass trombone. And I my whole life, out of curiosity and joy, I learned music and how to play it, never knowing where it was going to take me, but always trying to understand a little better and try and learn how to play music with other people and try how do you sing a pure note, and how do you sing harmony, and how do you play an F sharp minor, which at first seems impossible until you figure out how the guitar works. And then suddenly along comes some opportunity where you're covering Bowie from a space station, something you never thought was going to happen.
We're all together now.
A lot of people look at me then and go, so did you teach yourself guitar, pick up a little guitar while you're on the space station? And it just, it makes me laugh in that, I'm an overnight musician success after having practiced and prepared for it my whole life.
Yeah, if you think about it, that YouTube video is like 30 times platinum. Yeah. Like, you're one of the most successful musicians on the planet.
Yeah, it's funny. And even, Bowie said it was the most poignant version of the song ever made. And, and he really liked it. And I'm realistic about it. I am not the best musician in the world. But if you really want to boil it down, by definition, that would be one person to be the best musician in the world. And I'm not the worst musician in the world. That's somebody else. I'm somewhere in the middle, like everybody else. I'm just one of the musicians in the world. And I do some stuff okay and some stuff not okay. The beauty of it is to love it and to have fun doing it, and to notice when fate slaps you in the side of the head and give it your best shot and see what happens. And it was so lovely, but it just makes me laugh. People say, "Oh, did you pick up a little Russian to be able to go to the space station?" You know, I started studying Russian in 1993 so that I could command a spaceship and fly a Russian Soyuz 20 years later in 2013. So I had thousands of hours studying Russian with never any guarantee that I was going to use it. Just one more skill to have that might open up opportunities for me in the future. And so it's funny, people come up and go, "Oh, did you pick up a little Russian?" And well, yeah. I did.
Now, did you guys, when you were up in space there, did you ever joke around that you were in your F-38 or whatever, facing Soviet bombers? You might have been on opposite sides of the Cold War there.
Well, sure. We talk about it all the time. And I mean, there's huge tension between what some of Russia's doing right now and what the rest of the world is doing. Inexcusable, myopic, destructive national behaviors by some people in Russia. But Russia is hundreds of millions of people.
Right.
And you can't say, when you say America, you don't mean every single American. And one thing I've learned living in Russia, I was NASA's director of operations in Russia and learned the language. There is so much more to like than to mistrust or fear. And the fact that I was a NORAD pilot during the Cold War, ready to defend North America against attack, and actually racing out many, many times over the Atlantic day and night to intercept Soviet bombers that were either just on their way to Cuba or were practicing cruise missile launches on North America. It was real. It was serious. It was part of the geopolitics that were going on at the time. But that doesn't mean that I need to have a myopic hatred for the rest of my life.
Right.
All it means was I was trying to be as trustworthy and competent and professionally ready to do my job as I could at the time. But when I helped build the Russian space station just 8 years later, as a Canadian on board an American shuttle helping to build the Russian space station using the big Canadian robot arm, to me, that was way better. That was what we should be doing as people. It doesn't discount conflict. It doesn't discount reality, but it's possible to defend what's important to you, but also be working towards what I think are globally better ideas at the same time. So yeah, on the space station, we do talk about it. We joke about it. You know, Gennady Padalka, who's up on the station right now, and Scott Kelly, who's up there right now, they were both fighter pilots defending their country, but right now they are just two human beings exploring the universe together.
That's amazing.
And the two are not necessarily at irretrievable odds with each other.
You know, Chris, I know you're very busy. I wanted to ask you about one more thing, which is you present in your book a very rational argument for the possibility of alien life. Basically saying, there's billions of Earth-like planets in our galaxy, and there's billions of galaxies. So there is this possibility. Do you think? How often do you think about that? Like, do you think there's ever a chance we could come into contact with something?
I think I am like, when we first started domesticating animals, maybe 10,000 years ago, and somebody's job was to go out and keep the wolves away from the goats. And they had to do that day and night. And so they had to live out sitting under the big open sky. And a lot of those people started naming the stars. They started coming up with the constellations, the original shepherds. And it had to have occurred to them how small they are under this enormous eternity that is going around us. And they questioned how could we fly, and are we alone? I'm sure those questions occurred to them. And so I'm not at all unique in questioning, are we alone? But we've looked a lot further. Just in the last 10 years, we're seeing planets around other stars, thousands of planets, actually knowing for sure, not just guessing, but now we know on average, basically, that every star has at least one planet. And with the telescopes we've built in the last 10 years, 15 years, we're starting to understand how many stars there are. And there's a number out there like septillion stars, like, a billion is two, and then there's a trillion, and there's a quadrillion. You go all the way up to a septillion, which you can't even comprehend how big that number is. And pretty much every single one of those stars has a planet. And to think that the only place out of the odds of being septillion to one that life could have possibly developed is our particular little blue ball, to me is just an arrogance and an ignorance that is comical. But then on the other side, we have almost no grasp of what a billion years is. It's hard for us to understand 80 years, let alone a billion, or 4.5 billion or 13 billion. And to think that in our little brief finger snap of time that we're alive on Earth, that this is the most important time in the history of the universe, and that aliens are sneaking around the planet and only revealing themselves to certain people and abducting farmers in Arkansas and stuff. It's just, it's just also an arrogant, optimistic self-importance. The odds are overwhelming that we are not alone in the universe, but we haven't met anybody yet to discount it. For all we know, we're the only life in the universe. But boy, every discovery helps us be slightly better informed. And we know that Mars had oceans for millions of years and had fresh water. We know that the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, some of them have oceans of water. This asteroid that's in the asteroid belt series, it may have more fresh water on it than Earth does. And they have heat. And Mars has the biggest volcano in the solar system. And every cubic foot of dirt on Mars has a liter of water in it. I think we're going to be able, through our own curiosity and exploration, just in our own solar system maybe, to be able to answer that question of whether there's even primitive life somewhere else. And that'll be a huge moment of self-realization, to know for sure that you could answer that shepherd's question of whether we're alone in the universe or not. And that is almost at the very core of exploration itself.
Well, Chris, thanks so much for coming on the show. I've really enjoyed everything you've done in social media, but also I highly recommend your book, An Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth, What Going to Space Taught Me About Ingenuity, Determination, and Being Prepared for Anything. I benefited from reading the book, so I hope people read it. It's a great read. And once again, thank you.
Well, thank you very much, James. It was a delight to have a conversation with you, and I congratulate you on the huge successes you've had as well. I feel very self-conscious having just talked about me the whole time, but thank you.
No. I had more questions, so you're more interesting than me. So
well, nice to talk. I hope we get to meet you in person someday.
Definitely. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
For more from James, check out the James Altucher Show on the Stansberry Radio Network at stansberryradio.com and get yourself on the free insiders list today.
AI might be the most important new computer technology ever. It's storming every industry, and literally billions of dollars are being invested. So buckle up. The problem is that AI needs a lot of speed and processing power, so how do you compete without costs spiraling out of control? It's time to upgrade to the next generation of the cloud. Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, or OCI. OCI is a single platform for your infrastructure, database, application development, and AI needs. OCI has 4 to 8 times the bandwidth of other clouds, offers one consistent price instead of variable regional pricing, and of course, nobody does data better than Oracle. So now you can train your AI models at twice the speed and less than half the cost of other clouds. If you want to do more and spend less, like Uber, 8x8, and Databricks Mosaic, take a free test drive of OCI at oracle.com/advance. That's oracle.com/advance. oracle.com/advance.